The Yuma Territorial Prison, often called the Desert Alcatraz, has created its own unique legacy on the banks of the Colorado River. During its 33 years of operation, it housed more than 3,000 prisoners, ranging in age from young teens to old men. Crimes ranged from brutal murders to white-collar crime to adultery, even seduction on the promise of marriage. There were also what some might call political prisoners, from Mexican revolutionaries to 9 Mormons who went to prison for polygamy instead of renouncing the tenets of their religion at that time. And there were the 29 women prisoners who created chaos in a prison mostly populated by men. It was 1875, and Arizona was not yet a state. The territorial legislature was convening to address several pressing issues, one of them being the establishment of a territorial prison. Legislator Jose Maria Redondo was in attendance that day. Redondo was a Yuma entrepreneur, rancher, and farmer, and would later be referred to as the father of the prison.
They went up for a vote. They were in the legislature. They were going to choose a state capital, the seat of the university, and a prison. So Tucson had the U of A, and Prescott was the capital, and Yuma was not even mentioned in the morning of this meeting. So all the legislators went to lunch except for Jose Maria Redondo. And he crossed out Phoenix and wrote in Yuma. And when the legislators came back, they rushed the bill through so they could all go home, and Yuma ends up with a prison.
1 year later, on July 1st, 1876, the prison opened. The first prisoners began their sentences within the prison cells that they had built themselves, carving them into the granite outcropping of the Yuma Crossing, where the Gila and Colorado rivers merged. It was not long after its opening that prisoners began to refer to the prison as the Hell Hole. Inmates were crammed 6 to a cell. A single bucket was all that was provided as a bathroom. The place was dirty. Prisoners were allowed 1 bath per week. In the summer, scorching temperatures would bake prisoners in their cells. All around the prison, large sewer roaches roamed free. Those who broke prison rules wore a ball and chain, and the worst offenders were confined to the hated dark cell, some for as long as 100 days straight. The windowless cell was 15 feet by 15 feet, carved into the solid granite hill with a cage that sat in the middle. Prisoners were fed only bread and water, and some were driven half-crazed from the perpetual darkness.
There were times when there were multiple prisoners in this dark cell together. So you have to remember that there was no latrine. The prisoner was stripped down to his underwear and caged in there. And the reason the cage was there is when the guards brought the bread and water once a day, that prisoner would not rush the door.
And they used to say about the Yuma Territorial Prison that some of these guys put them in solitary confinement, and the guards took great pleasure in dropping scorpions in through the air hole or a snake or something like that.
Like at many prisons, the will of the prisoner often could not be broken. There were numerous attempts to escape. Most attempts were unsuccessful, but a few lucky ones, or not so lucky, did disappear into the desert, never to be seen again. Prisoners would fashion makeshift ladders or rope to use in their plan to escape over the wall. One simply walked off when outside the prison walls on a work detail. The boldest of all the escape attempts was the infamous Gates Riot of 1887. A small group of prisoners overtook Superintendent Thomas Gates, acquiring his pistol and holding Gates hostage as they demanded the doors be opened. With a pistol to his head, Gates' life was threatened. It would take another inmate, Barney Riggs, to disarm one of the assailants and rescue the superintendent. Riggs had been serving a life sentence for killing a man he believed to be involved with his wife. His heroism on that day earned him a pardon from the governor, and he was later freed. During its operation, approximately 110 inmates died while serving time. 8 were shot and killed during attempted escapes, and 4 others chose suicide as their way of escape. Most often, deaths were caused by everyday health issues like consumption, now known as tuberculosis, or from heart failure. Francisco Garcia held the distinction of being the only inmate to be executed while incarcerated at the prison. Garcia was hung by Yuma County for the murder of a fellow inmate. Contrary to its hellhole moniker, the local townspeople often referred to the prison as the country club in the Colorado due to its many modern amenities.
In general, the Yuma Territorial Prison was considered a very humane place for its day.
The prison had a library, the largest in the territory at the time, and prisoners were taught to read and write, speak Spanish and German, and learn arithmetic. The prison had a hospital, somewhat advanced for its time. By 1885, it had electricity and fans which circulated air in the cell block, along with an early telephone. They even had a prison band. Clearly, the prison had a high-minded vision for its day, best described by Superintendent Thomas Gates.
It is, and has ever been, my object to elevate rather than depress the men who have been thrown under my supervision, to inspire them with renewed hope and revive the tottering principles of true manhood. To this end, I have granted every liberty consistent with good prison government. Privileges.
As the Arizona Territory grew, so did its demand for more prison cells. With no room for expansion, the Yuma Territorial Prison was closed in 1909, and the prisoners were relocated to the new prison at Florence, Arizona. Yuma would repurpose the prison as a temporary high school from 1910 to 1914 until a new Yuma High School could be built. It was from that prison stay that during a high school football game, Phoenix fans began to taunt the Yuma players, calling them criminals. Yuma High School took the name as a badge of honor, and their sports teams have been called the Criminals or Crims ever since. The 1920s saw the decline and near ruin of the prison. The Southern Pacific Railroad, seeking a safer route over the Colorado River, built a new bridge and rail line at the granite outcroppings, destroying nearly a third of the prison facilities.
Back in the Great Depression, the Yuma community saved the prison at that time. It was literally being picked apart by people trying to salvage building materials, hobos living there. It was on the verge of destruction. And the Yuma community rallied together. It was only 3,000 or 4,000 people at that time. They posted a guard. Ultimately, with New Deal funds, built the museum building and then ran the museum as a city museum from 1940 to 1960, well before the state park system existed.
History repeated itself when, in 2010, during the Great Recession, state budget cuts threatened the closure of the Yuma Territorial Prison State Historic Park. The Yuma community banded together to raise $70,000 in 60 days, and the city of Yuma and the Yuma Crossing National Heritage Area teamed up to save and revitalize the park.
In some ways, the Great Recession was a blessing in disguise. Things had reached such a crisis point that the community had to rally together, reinvest in the park. And I think what you now see is a great pride that we all have, and it's really become a community treasure.
With support from park visitors and a determined community, we look forward to another century of telling the story of the Old West's toughest prison and enhancing the legend of the Yuma Territorial Prison.